Right, well, here we are. I have a dream, or something like that. And am I treating that whole idea contemptuously? Maybe. Or maybe I'm actually recognizing that there could be something to it. I guess we're going to get to that at some point. Um, I guess the entire thing about this I have a dream thing is that it it's not like it's anything new. It's not like it's anything new at all. People have been, ever since humanity has existed as such, compelled by visions and dreams. Uh, People write about them, people speak about them, people go and share them with other people. Or at least those that are influencers tend to do a good job of it. And the reason I bring that up is actually having to do with the previous discussion that we had about the Iliad 2 weeks ago. I know there was an entire week with no stream, and I think that was for the best of everyone that had to deal with me that particular week. Anyhow, the reason I brought that up is because of a particular speech that was given by King Agamemnon to the Greeks. And I'd like to compare that then to some other speeches that are renowned, some other speeches that in history were recognized to be good, and see what the commonalities are. So we'll begin by looking, or listening rather, to King Agamemnon's speech. And I'm not going to claim to have anything on King Agamemnon in terms of my prowess, in terms of my ability to articulate a speech in a good way, but I hope that you would at least take a look at the intention and take a look at the words, and will come to your own conclusion about what might have happened or how people might have responded. Agamemnon's speech goes, My fellow warriors, hear a dream from heaven. Amid the stillness of the vacant night, approached me semblance close in stature bulk, and air of noble Nestor at mine head. The shadow took his stand, and thus he spake. O son of Atreus, thee renowned in arms, and in the race sleep'st thou, it ill behoves, to sleep all night the man of high employ, and charged as thou art with the people's care. Now therefore mark me well who sent from Jove. Inform thee that although so far remote, he yet compassionates and thinks on thee. With kind solicitude he bids thee arm thy universal host, for that the time when the Achaeans shall at length possess wide Ilium hath arrived the gods above, no longer dwell at variance, the requests of Juno have prevailed now woe to Troy, from Jove himself her fate is on the wing. Charge this on thy remembrance, thus he spake, then vanished suddenly, and I awoke. Haste therefore, let us arm, if arm we may, the warlike sons of Greece, but first myself will prove them, recommending instant flight, with all our ships and ye throughout the host. Dispersed shall next encourage all to stay. He ceased and sat, when in the midst arose, of highest fame for wisdom, Nestor king of sandy Pylus, who them thus bespake. Friends, counselors, and leaders of the Greeks, had any meaner Argive told his dream, we had pronounced it false, and should the more have shrunk from battle, but the dream is his, who boasts himself our highest in command. Haste, arm we, if we may, the sons of Greece. So King Agamemnon goes and shares his dream, and then Nestor, who interestingly was given a hat tip in the dream, or in the speech, then it comes and says, oh, listen to this guy, he knows what he's talking about. So Agamemnon had two traits that people tend to go for, regardless of whether they should. One trait was that he had a dream, a compelling vision, something that spoke to the people of that time and era. The gods told me to do this, we will win. And he had clout, he had prestige, he had authority, and he had a sycophant. Or he had somebody going saying, oh, listen to this guy, he knows what he's talking about. Nestor was viewed as a very capable advisor. He performed the advisory role very well. And so, since Nestor was able to perform the advisory role, people trusted him, and he went and affirmed the authority that the king had. Then you wind up getting a bunch of Greeks ready to pack up everything and go to Troy and fight, even though the battle is actually going to be a losing one. A mass of armies was moved, a massive, ultimately kind of somewhat free armies, people that could choose to be there or not, were compelled by this person with a compelling vision speaking from a position of authority. And you can like it or you can hate it, but that is the theme. That is what happens. That is who gets listened to. You're dealing with rhetoric. You're dealing with the art of convincing people. And if you go and you look, it's completely infused with pathos and a bit of ethos and very little logos. The pathos, the passion, is what grabs the listener. And the ethos, and that ultimately comes from the arguing from a position of authority. So people tend to believe something that a good person says more than something a bad person says. I'll give the example of during the 2016 electoral cycle. Specifically, when the people in the states were electing a president, people viewed Trump as this evil one, and so no matter what he said, many people on the left were suspicious. Well, then, many people on the right viewed Hillary as an evil one, and therefore no matter what she said, the right viewed her as suspicious. Psychological studies have been conducted that say that people will actually be more firmly united if they are voting against something very, very clear. And they'll take a stronger stance, especially if your own candidate is something else. So a whole lot of people showed up as Hillary voters specifically to vote against Trump, and a whole lot of people showed up as Trump voters specifically to vote against Hillary. So with that particular dynamic in mind, it wasn't that either of them had that much ethos, although I would personally maintain that Trump had considerably more. Trump had considerably more than Hillary, but there were other candidates that perhaps would have been having higher ethos than either of the people that could have possibly gotten elected there at the end. Either way, the pathos is ultimately what wins, not the logos. And for someone like me, that's very bothersome. I find that to be very, very difficult to deal with, because that means somebody with a compelling voice, a compelling story, a compelling message, and by compelling, I don't mean logically compelling, I mean tugs at the heartstrings. You know, you wind up getting heartstrings tugged at, and then people move. And the way you tug at people's heartstrings is you demonstrate the pathos, and you come from a position of demonstrating ethos. Then there's just enough logos to move people to action. Now, the other thing that I wanted to compare this to, well, there were two different speeches. Oops, there we go. Here we go. I have the I Have a Dream speech. Okay, here we go. So, King begins, or rather, the famous part of his speech starts, I say to you today, my friends, so even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It's a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. Alright, so he has the word dream. Here, 1, 2, 3 times he says the word dream in the opening sentence. I still have a dream. It's a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. So he's repeating things 3 times, which gives it a sense of closure and a sense of completeness. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. So we have the table of brotherhood. All men are created equal. We have all of these sayings that conjure up a picture, that conjure up an image. You see people eating together at the table. You see people that are equal. Whatever that means to you, that saying will conjure it up. I have a dream that one day even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. An oasis. So you see some sort of a desert, a completely barren place, wherein there is an oasis, wherein there is fresh water, wherein you get to rest a bit. So you would go and say, okay, well, the you would assume at that point the United States would be bad, and you're hoping that even Mississippi would wind up becoming the best of it all, or one of many oases in the realm of people being slaves and being treated with injustice. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. So you can see that he has moved 1, 2, 3. So I have a dream this nation will rise up one day on the red hills of Georgia, one day even the state of Mississippi, and then you go into the little more abstract, only a little more abstract. My 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. So you're moving into a little more abstract idea that forces somebody to engage their imagination, but you've already given their imagination something to feed off of to begin with. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day down in Alabama with its vicious racists, with its governor having his lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification, one day right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted, every hill and mountain shall be made low, the rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight, and the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. Right, so basically, the king is bringing a utopian vision. Okay, this imagery in the last I have a dream statement is almost directly from the Bible, which you would kind of expect from a pastory dude, right? So he's advocating for heaven on earth, right? And heaven is understood as freedom, which is interesting because if you go even back a little further and you think about the context that a Christian might be coming into this whole idea of freedom from, you need look no further than the Christian 10 Commandments or the Jewish 10 Statements, right? Which begin, I am the Lord your God who brought you out from the land of Egypt, from the house of slavery, right? So the idea that God likes people to be free is one that permeates Christendom. So you wind up having this whole idea that freedom is something to be valued. And so on this very valuable thing that perhaps leaves people with their own interpretations and gives them enough wiggle room to be able to somehow attach themselves to this ideal, you wind up moving people to doing things. Martin Luther King Jr. did not say, I have a plan. That was not the title of his speech. That was not what I have a plan was not the point. I have a dream was the point. Right? Agamemnon had a dream, and that dream was compelling to the Aegeans. They wanted to go and win the war. In that particular era, the speech that King gave was necessary. I'm referring to Martin Luther King Jr. The speech that MLK gave was necessary in order to generate within people the vision of what it was that he wanted to see happen. Then our final speech is the Kennedy speech. We choose to go to the moon. So Kennedy then speaks. The famous point of his speech is, we choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we are willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one which we intend to win. And the others too. It is for these reasons that I regard... Okay. We choose, we choose, we choose. So here, and then he gives the because. Not because they are easy, but because they are hard. He contrasts the easy and the hard. And he'll say, yes, I know this is hard. Yes, I know this is difficult, but we're going to do this anyway. Now, whether I believe that it's the responsibility of the government to go and send people to the moon or not is completely irrelevant in this particular situation, because Kennedy captured the hearts of the people. People went with the idea, and they liked the idea of going to the moon, to doing these hard things to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills, which in the context of the Cold War was very important. To organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. It was incredible. There we get to beat the Reds, we get to beat the Soviets, we get to go, and because we know we are better, we're going to organize ourselves, we're going to measure ourselves, we're going to do something tangible and beat the Russians. Because that challenge is one we are willing to accept. We are unwilling to postpone, and one which we intend to win, and the others too. Alright, so in the last 24 hours we have seen facilities now being created for the greatest and most complex exploration in man's history. So we're talking about the exploration. Felt the ground shake and the air shattered by the testing of a Saturn C-1 booster rocket, many times as powerful as the Atlas, which launched John Glenn, generating power equivalent to 10,000 automobiles with their accelerators on the floor. Okay, so he's bringing and conjuring up images that people knew. Right? Feeling the ground shake. 10,000 automobiles. We have seen the site where the F-1 rocket engines, each one as powerful as all 8 engines of the Saturn combined, will be clustered together to make the advanced Saturn missile, assembled in a new building to be built at Cape Canaveral, as tall as a 48-story structure, as wide as a city block, and as long as 2 lengths of this field. So satellites made in the United States of America, and so on. He doesn't talk about any specs. He doesn't talk about the plans. He very briefly goes over what things look like, but the plans he leaves to different people. He was not responsible to communicate any of this to the general public. What he was doing was communicating a vision in a compelling way. And agree with his policies or not, which I think that he was, insofar as presidents go, he wasn't a particularly bad one. The way that JFK articulated those things was, for what he was trying to accomplish, he did exactly what he needed to do. What MLK was trying to accomplish, he did exactly what he needed to do. What Agamemnon was trying to accomplish, for what that was, he did exactly what he needed to do. Which meant taking a step back from the planning, taking a step back from all the other different things, and getting the vision so firmly entrenched in the minds of the listeners that they themselves would go and carry this vision forward. And I'll admit, as a husband and as a father, that this is difficult. This is not easy to do. Some people are much better at it than others. For me, this is very difficult. I prefer to plan. I prefer to operate on the basis that people, the first time that you communicate something, people will remember, and people will develop their own vision in accordance with what needs to be done. I assume that people have the creativity and the memory and the drive that it takes to go and do this themselves. I don't find it as necessary for myself, and therefore I impute that on others. That people don't need to constantly be reminded of a vision, but I'm wrong. History is not on my side. History is not on my side. All the great historical figures that accomplished anything wound up, at least to some extent, needing to engage the imaginations of other people. And the only way you ever enlist people to actually help you is in order for them to have the idea become their own. Which means that the vision needs to be compelling enough to allow people to latch onto it. So the vision needs to be something bigger than a single person or a single group even. It needs to be something big and something compelling. Winning a war, making it to the moon, having your children being judged by the content of their character instead of the color of their skin. These sorts of things, however vague they may be, and however unclear a plan might be, or however difficult it may be to actually make this plan, people don't care. People will move heaven and earth if the vision exists. And I personally jump the gun. I go straight to the planning stage. It's like, well, can't everybody see that this is an important vision? We've already talked about this last week. We talked about this last year. And apparently, especially for many of the sensing types of people, for many of the people that find it considerably easier to live in the present, these visions get constantly changed. These visions get constantly relegated to the back burner. These visions get constantly pushed aside for the more pressing needs of the present. And sometimes people get so wrapped up in the present that they need to be reminded of these visions. And so, the job of a leader, the role of a leader, is much more maintenance of morale, keeping the vision clear, and maybe giving a little bit of planning advice here and there, or behind the scenes working with the planners. But ultimately, the public face of a leader needs to be one with an easily articulable, easily understood vision. And then the vision can lead to the goal. And the goal can lead to the plan. And the vision that has led to the goal and the plan for each individual drives the action. And if the vision is not compelling, the action will not take place. People will self-sabotage, people will sabotage, people will do whatever. Will screw things up if they don't share in the vision. I mean, the vision can be even something as simple as, I'm doing this for a paycheck, right? But if it's something really, really compelling, people are much more likely to comply. So the lesson learned from Agamemnon's little speech, the lesson learned from King, the lesson learned from Kennedy, is that vision works. And, you know, especially in ancient days when people would just talk about their dreams. Well, people would just say, I had this dream last night, and people thought that they were imbued with some sort of cosmic significance. The person that could communicate the dream the best, or the person that could BS the best, would find himself often on top of the totem pole, on top of the hierarchy, and guiding society in accordance with whatever this compelling vision happened to be. Start with the vision. Start with the reason for doing something, and everything else will fall into place. And you'll indeed have more people who are willing to take initiative themselves. Alright, I've been streaming for half an hour. At this point, I'm going to go and take a little look see if anyone has actually come and seen anything that we've been talking about. Ah! Hello, everyone. So, that's the little bit about Agamemnon. Now, what happened because of this dream? What happened because it was shared? So saying, Nestor left the council him at once, the sceptred chiefs obedient to his voice. A rising followed, and the throng began. As from the hollow rock bees stream abroad, and in succession endless seek the fields, now clustering and now scattered far and near, in springtime among all the new-blown flowers. So they to council swarmed, troop after troop, Grecians of every tribe from camp and fleet, assembling orderly o'er all the plain. Beside the shore of ocean in the midst, a kindling rumor messenger of Jove impelled them, and they went, loud was the din of the assembling thousands groaned the earth. When down they sat, and murmurs ran around, 9 heralds cried aloud, will ye restrain your clamors, that your heaven-taught kings may speak? Scarce were they settled, and the clang had ceased, when Agamemnon, sovereign o'er them all, sceptre in hand, arose that sceptre erst Vulcan with labor forged, and to the hand consigned it of the king Saturnian Jove. Jove to the vanquisher of Ino's guard, and he to Pelops in his turn, to royal Atreus, Atreus at his death, bequeathed it to Thyestes rich in flocks, and rich Thyestes left it to be borne by Agamemnon, symbol of his right, to empire over Argos and her isles. On that he leaned, and rapid thus began. Here's another speech. Friends, Grecian heroes, ministers of Mars. So ministers of Mars, the god of war. That was Ares in Greek. Friends, Grecian heroes, ministers of Mars, ye see me here entangled in the snares of unpropitious Jove. He promised once, and with a nod confirmed it, that with spoils of Ilium laden we should hence return. But now devising ill he sends me shamed, and with diminished numbers home to Greece. So stands his sovereign pleasure, who hath laid the bulwarks of a full many a city low, and more shall level matchless in his might, that such a numerous host of Greeks as we, warring with fewer than ourselves, should find no fruit of all our toil, and none appears, will make us vile with ages yet to come. For should we now strike truce till Greece and Troy might number each her own, and were the Greeks distributed in bands, 10 Greeks in each, our banded decad should exceed so far their units that all Troy could not supply, for every 10 a man to fill us wine. So far the Achaeans in my thoughts surpass the native Trojans, but in Troy are those who baffle much my purpose, aids derived from other states, spear-armed auxiliaries firm in the defense of Ilium's lofty towers. 9 years have passed us over, 9 long years. Our ships are rotted, and our tackle marred, and all our wives and little ones at home sit watching our return, while this attempt hangs still in doubt, for which that home we left. Accept ye then my counsel, fly we swift, with all our fleet back to our native land, hopeless of Troy not yet to be subdued. So spake the king, whom all the concourse heard, with minds in tumult tossed, all save the few. Partners of his intent, commotion shook the whole assembly, such as heaves the flood of the Icarian deep, when south and east burst forth together from the clouds of Jove, and as with vehement the west wind falls on standing corn mature, the loaded ears innumerable bow before the gale. So was the council shaken with a shout. All flew toward the ships, upraised the dust, stood o'er them universal was the cry. Now clear the passages, strike down the props, set every vessel free, launch and away. Heaven rang with exclamation of the host, all homeward bent in launching glad the fleet. Then baffled fate had the Achaeans seen, returning premature, but Juno thus, with admonition quick to Pallas spake. Unconquered daughter of Jove, Aegis armed. Ah, foul dishonor is it thus at last, that the Achaeans on the billows borne shall seek again their country, leaving here to be the vaunt of Ilium and her king, Helen of Argos, in whose cause the Greeks have numerous perished from their home remote. Haste, seek the mail-armed multitude by force, detain them of thy soothing speech ere yet. All launch their oary barks into the flood. She spake, nor did Miniver not comply, but darting swift from the Olympian heights, reached soon Achaea's fleet. There she perceived, prudent as Jove himself, Ulysses firm. He stood, he touched not even with his hand his sable bark, for sorrow whelmed his soul. The Athenian goddess azure-eyed beside him stood, and thus the chief bespake. Laertes, noble son, for wiles renowned, why seek ye thus precipitate your ships? Intend ye flight? And it is thus at last that the Achaeans on the billows borne shall seek again their country, leaving here to be the vaunt of Ilium and her king, Helen of Argos, in whose cause the Greeks have numerous perished from their home remote. Delay not, rush into the throng by force, detain them of thy soothing speech ere yet. All launch their oary barks into the flood. So, communication is key. Communication is key if you want to get something. If you're not there communicating your vision, if you're not there communicating what's important to you, well, there's really not much else to be done. You're the one responsible for your vision. And if you have a particular set of plans that you are trying to accomplish, it might behoove you to think, well, okay, if I have this particular set of plans and this particular set of ideas, how in the world do I make it compelling to somebody else? And I don't know that logically arguing it would always work. I don't know that that would actually happen. Whatever it is your goal happens to be, whatever the end product, whatever the vision, whatever the reason behind it all, that is what you need to communicate. For me, the reason I do what I do, first and foremost, is because I want my children to receive a proper education and be prepared to face whatever world they happen to face. Secondly, the reason I'm for the educational reform that I am is because I want my children to be able to be surrounded by other movers and other shakers and other people who are competent and capable and able to do whatever needs to be done at any given point in history in order to keep humanity going, in order to make good decisions. If my children are making poor decisions, I am going to go and I'm going to feel like a failure as a father. If those in my social circles are making poor decisions, I'm going to feel like a failure as a citizen. Now, of course, I'm not responsible for the actions of other people, but I am responsible for what I say and do. And I firmly believe that if I'm going to have an idea of how things should be, if I'm going to have an idea of how education should be run, it has to be based off of caring for children. And I know this, it sounds like a stupid thing for me to even have to bring up. It's like, of course I care for children. Why else would I be trying to go for educational reform? I'm not one of the kinds of people that wants to use the educational system as a platform for indoctrinating children with leftist views. That's not my goal for education. That's not my goal for schooling. That's the reason that I think that schooling as an institution has outlived its usefulness. Schooling as an institution has existed primarily and predominantly for the purpose, at least as such, for getting people to be ready for factory work. And now we are clearly through the industrial age, so whatever relevance there may have been, whatever people might have been able to argue, which, by the way, I don't even view as compelling in the first place, whatever people might have been able to argue is not valid. It's not valid. You don't need schools to generate competent human beings. You need to have cause and effect inextricably linked. You can't have the systems that are in place divorcing cause from effect. And the school system does just that. And the school system teaches people that your actions don't actually have any consequence, aside from that which is fabricated, which is wrong. Going to school to get good grades only works if the person who's giving the grades actually has a clue as to what's required in the real world. And the fact of the matter is, the only people that have a clue are those that actually are in the process of meeting the needs of other people. The service providers, the businessmen, and so on. And so I advocate for a system of people being able to go and get internships, of people being able to go and get residencies, of people being able to go and do all these different things as schooling, of people being able to receive an education in a more classical sense, of people being able to go to university if they want, of people being able to do trade school in a much more hands-on way than what they do now, of people being able to learn whatever subjects are necessary, and of being given the opportunity of pursuing the good and the true and the beautiful in such a way as to not be constrained by a list of back-of-the-chapter questions, without having to answer to teachers that don't have a clue what they're talking about. However useful people might think school is, I would say that real life is much more useful. and trying to separate children from that and shield children from that and make them think that real life is something that it's not is doing them a horrible disservice. Right? I don't think that this needs to be articulated. To me, it just is obvious. I've lived through enough of the school system, done things differently enough from what other people have done, and achieved far better results, that I'm sitting here championing this view and wondering why in the world do I need to repeat myself over and over. Like, people don't get it. Yeah, of course people don't get it, because it's a different paradigm. A much older paradigm. I mean, this paradigm was last commonly practiced over 150 years ago. And I'm not saying this is any kind of an appeal to history. I'm just saying this is an appeal to, this has worked in the past. This is how people function. People function best when they have skin in the game. And school forces you to, at very best, have skin in the game in an artificial sense. And at worst, it forces you to not have any skin in the game whatsoever and zero incentive to actually learn. You know, just like capitalism is the least bad. I'm not going to say that capitalism is good per se, but it evolved taking advantage of human nature rather than trying to fight against it. And so we need to have education evolving in such a way as to take advantage of human nature rather than fighting against it. Moral education would be clearly the responsibility of parents and of caretakers and of communities and of social circles to engender within the students. And with the particular, whatever moral framework it happens to be, that provides the vision. That provides what people need in order to be able to structure their life. They can figure out how they fit into a bigger picture by having clear, straightforward morals. Having this superstructure imposed upon society, having morals imposed, and I know this might sound very strange, is the only way to properly enjoy freedom. Because the moment that morals go out the window, that is the same moment that people become unable to govern themselves and need to rely on an authoritarian regime to do it for them. An internal moral compass is the first thing that needs to be engendered within the students. Without it, society will crumble. Without it, leftism will win. And so, I advocate for parents to take their responsibility as advocates and as agents of their children, as caretakers of their children, as stewards of their children. To act in accordance with this responsibility, to act in accordance with this role. If just that takes place, society will be much better. Furthermore, if that takes place, the parents will figure out a way of getting the children a better education. The parents will figure out. And how will the parents figure out? By looking at their kids. The child will have a huge role in determining his own educational path, far, far more than they ever do now. Or far, far more than they usually do now. I mean, homeschoolers and unschoolers and people that do things in untraditional methods have an incredible advantage. Of course, they can throw it away by being screwballs, but they have an incredible advantage. If you look at the average amount of money spent per student per year in the school system, it is abysmal. It's now very close, I think a little over $11,000 a year. $11,000 a year to educate a student. That is abysmal. You're paying to educate a student rather than getting paid to educate a student. What went wrong? The student needs to go producing things and learning things. Students can go and generate value. Students can go and do things and learn things and grow into things and learn to adapt to circumstances. School doesn't teach that. School is just a money sink. School is just a money sink. And so, I can go and I can talk until I'm blue in the face about how inadequate school is, but unless people go and associate homeschooling and unschooling and all other manner of non-traditional education with success, they're just going to call me a crackpot. Well, the fact of the matter is, I'm coming from a position of having seen this work. I'm coming from a position of having to have made this work. I'm coming from a position of having to have struggled through everything at every single step, and ultimately of having a lot of the stars aligning right. And I'd like to be able to generate that same kind of an environment for other people. I wound up graduating university when I was 16 years old with 2 degrees. What of it? If I can't go and take this story and apply it to somebody else, and I can't go and find a way of reverse engineering what it is that I've done, if I can't go and convince people that yes, this is possible for you too, you can do way better than I did. You can learn from my mistakes. You cannot fall into the same pits that I've fallen into. You can take even bigger advantage of your educational opportunities than I ever took. I've learned from my own mistakes, and I can offer you an even better situation. If I'm not constantly there communicating that, people will just go and view my thing as just this abstract theory that has no place in reality. And the fact of the matter is, it's the best way I know to educate anybody. I'm not saying doing exactly what I did, but I'm saying that in principle, following the same principles that I followed is the best way to achieve an education. More on this later, but I will let you know that one of the goals associated with this dream is to start an online university with a separate accreditation system. A separate accreditation system. One in which we work with employers. One in which we work with people that are actually serving people's needs to come up with curricula that will enable people and encourage people and draw people into a pattern of lifelong learning, of constant personal development, and of being able to change with the times, because the times are changing, and the times are changing faster than they have at any other point in history. One of the things that need to take place is that university education needs to be rethought. Classical university education needs to be modified slightly to be brought into the 21st century. The principles need to remain, the methods need to be modified. The principles need to remain the same, but the methods can be such that you can just do it online. But it can't be an impersonal online class either. You can have salons, you can have parlors, you can have YouTube videos, you can have chats, you can have all sorts of different things. You have Google Classroom, Google Hangouts. There's all sorts of features and all sorts of things that people haven't yet tried. But having the accreditation system completely revamped, reworked into being something that's associated with what the real world actually needs is one essential step in making sure higher education is what it needs to be. And if you have people that treat this responsibly, the cost will be far less than a third of what they currently are. The cost of attaining higher education. It's very, very easy to do this, especially if you don't wind up having to pay a bunch of ninnies in the administration. If you wind up having education being filled by movers and shakers, you don't need to have administrators, or at least you would need very, very few of them. That all results in lower out-of-pocket costs for students. That all results in a higher quality education that is more linked to reality. That all results in education being education as opposed to homogenization. So, going and articulating this vision, whatever your vision may be, is important if you want to achieve it. Why would you articulate your vision? You want to articulate your vision because however much we may want to accomplish things alone, it's considerably easier to accomplish things if we have allies rather than detractors. And one of the biggest things I found is that if people are scared by what you're proposing, they will sabotage you. And so, at bare minimum, you need PR. You need good public relations. And at best, you need to have something much more compelling to draw in allies as opposed to simply scare away detractors or to assuage detractors. And I'm going to go and take another look at the chat to see if anyone is actually chatting. Nope, no one's chatting. Oh well. Minor detail that. We have been going for about an hour, and I think that's about an appropriate time to call it quits. I've said all that I need to say. And tomorrow we will continue by reading more of the Iliad, Book 2, specifically the part after Minerva and Ulysses are there on the ship. And we'll look forward to seeing you then again in about another 23 hours. Thank you for tuning in. Goodbye.